Welcome to the second part of this 3-part series where we're exploring what's left of the British Empire. Last time, we explored the British overseas territories of Gibraltar, the sovereign base areas of Akrotiri and Dhekelia, the British Indian Ocean Territory, the Pitcairn Islands, the British Antarctic Territory, and South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands. In this video, we'll pick up right where we left off, and so without further ado, let's continue our journey. As we finish at South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands, it's only fitting to move on to its neighbour and erstwhile parent colony, the Falkland Islands, and its population of around 3,400 people. Perhaps most well known for being the site of the 1982 Falklands War, this territory has managed to put those dark days behind it and now enjoys economic prosperity thanks mainly to a thriving fishing industry and its location, which has made it of great interest to Antarctic tourists. By far the most populous settlement on the territory is found in its easternmost reaches, the capital city of Stanley, with around 2,500 residents of the island calling it home. All territory in the Falklands other than Stanley is collectively known as Cam, where 400 residents are scattered across small settlements on both East and West Falkland, the territory's two main islands. About 500 personnel affiliated with the British Armed Forces are also present, mainly at the Royal Air Force Base at Mount Pleasant. Inhabitants of the Falklands are largely British immigrants or their descendants, as no known population was present on the islands at the time of initial British settlement in 1764. Sheep have also made the journey with people over time, and have become familiar faces on the territory, which boasts a sheep population of around 490,000, equating to around 153 sheep per person. As we travel over South America and into the picturesque waters of the Caribbean Sea, we find the Cayman Islands, consisting of Grand Cayman, Little Cayman, and Cayman Brac, and its population of around 71,000 people. Most people have probably heard of the Cayman Islands, thanks to its reputation as a tax haven, as no companies or residents based there face any direct taxation on their incomes. Most of the government's income comes from indirect taxation, and as such, many imports into the territory come with high import duties, going up to 100% in the case of some automobiles. Tourism also forms a large part of the local economy, thanks to numerous attractions like underwater sea wrecks and stunning wildlife such as stingrays and sea turtles, as well as its year-round sunny weather. As of 2022, the islands have been under British control for over 350 years, making it one of the UK's oldest overseas territories, and has been under British rule since the Treaty of Madrid in 1670. Where England was given control of Jamaica, of which the Caymans were then a part. When Jamaica gained independence in August 1962 and became a Commonwealth realm, or an independent nation with the Queen as head of state, the Cayman Islands became a separate British colony. The population of the islands are largely immigrants or descendants of immigrants and slaves, as there was no native population at the time of initial discovery. Moving across the Caribbean to its eastern reaches, we reach the British Virgin Islands and its 30,000 strong population. Initially colonized by the Netherlands in 1648 and forming part of the larger Dutch West Indies colony, the English captured these islands in 1672, and these islands were subsequently incorporated into the British Leeward Islands colony. In the subsequent decades, sugarcane plantations became a key source of income for the islands and were often staffed by slaves forcibly brought over from Africa. By the early 1960s, the British Virgin Islands had become a separate colony and was seeking closer ties with the US, namely by adopting the US dollar as its official currency and seeking association with the neighboring US Virgin Islands, the latter of which did not occur. Around this time, The island's economy had been boosted largely by local government efforts to reduce the economy's dependence on agriculture and to promote and develop a financial sector, as well as to take advantage of the beautiful climate to build a tourist industry on the islands as well. A mere 170 kilometers to the east is another British overseas territory, the island of Anguilla, and its roughly 15,000 inhabitants. As in the case of the British Virgin Islands, no native population was found when Europeans first settled in 1631. By 1650, the English had taken over the islands and have largely held on to it to this day, despite numerous attacks from France in its early days of English settlement. Tobacco and cotton plantations fueled the economy and were again largely staffed by slaves until slavery was totally abolished in the British Empire in 1834. The large emigration that followed and subsequent abandonment of plantations soon led British authorities to place the island into an associated colony with the islands of St. Kitts and Nevis, against the wishes of inhabitants. This resentment continued for many decades and culminated in the establishment of the Republic of Anguilla, which lasted less than 2 years before coming under British control again in 1969. By 1980, British authorities granted Anguilla the right to become a separate colony from St. Kitts and Nevis, and while the latter became independent 3 years later, Anguilla has remained under British rule since, and has a stable local economy thanks to its successful tourism and financial sectors. Heading south, past the aforementioned St. Kitts and Nevis Islands, we conclude part 2 of this series with a small British overseas territory by the name of Montserrat and its 4,600 strong population. 1632 marked the first settlement of the island since it was abandoned by native tribes many centuries ago, when small groups of Irish people from St. Kitts settled there. Slaves from Africa were brought over to work the island's plantations, but these plantations were also worked by many Europeans who were known as redlegs. These individuals were often Scottish or Irish and were typically indentured servants, named after the sunburns acquired during work. Redlegs and African slaves formed very tight-knit communities, and sexual relations between the two groups were not uncommon. The island, once part of the Leeward Islands colony, was granted separate colony status in 1962. Recently, the island's former capital, Plymouth, was entirely evacuated in 1997 and is now a ghost town due to the threat posed by a nearby volcano. There is a temporary capital in a town called Braids, as a new, more permanent capital is expected to be constructed at Little Bay. Thanks for joining us on part 2 of this series. We hope you found it informative and that you learned something. If you haven't already, please check out part 1 of this series, and if you have, do check out part 3 of this series, where we'll continue to explore what's left of the British Empire.